Hi, my name is John, and I'm the Next Gen pastor here at Crosspoint, which in normal language means I get to help lead our kids, students, and college areas across our church. I'd like to begin our time together with a question that only you can answer. It won't take a Google search. Your parents won't be able to answer it. Even the smartest person on the planet won't be able to answer it. But you can. So here it is. What is the most defining moment of your life? If we were to draw a line and place little dots along the way or mile markers, what would be the most important moments to you? What might make the highlight reel? Moments that when you look back, you say, yes, that was so me. That was a significant point in time when really everything changed. If you can't think of one, that's okay. Just pretend that you're Taylor Swift and borrow one of hers. You know, like when she won Album of the Year in 2009, and again in 2015, and then again in 2020. What makes these moments incredible is that unlike the mundane parts of the day, rubbing sleep out of your eyes, riding the bus, getting gas, feeding the dog, getting lost in a run of endless YouTube videos, pause for a second. I have a friend named Pablo who works at YouTube, and he leads a team of people whose job it is to come up with ways to make sure that you keep watching video after video after video. So if you find yourself having wasted hours with nothing to show for it, or you now know how to keep squirrels out of bird feeders, you know who to blame. Pablo. Thanks, Pablo. But what makes the highlight moments extraordinary, as opposed to everything else, is that these moments can be defining moments. Moments that when you look back, you think, man, that was a snapshot that changed me. That was a moment when the hard work paid off. That was a decision that redirected the course of where I was headed. Or it's an experience that burned into your memory and sparked excitement or adventure or a passion for doing something. If this were my line, I might look at my first days in this world when I was adopted. That was a pretty big deal. Or the time that me and some school friends decided to build a race car completely out of vegetables. Or fast forwarding a little bit, there's a time in high school when my marching band won Bands of America. Or maybe it's when I proposed to my wife. Or when she actually said yes. Or when we had kids, which included also adopting our daughter. Or a time that we moved across the country to California. Or a literal mountaintop experience like the time that me and a best friend hiked up from the top of Yosemite at Glacier Point down to the valley floor. These kind of stake-in-the-ground moments do much more than mark a time or a date or a year of when things happen. In many ways, these moments can sum up a lot about you. But what these moments do best, though, is to tell your story. And that's a little bit of what today is all about. Today, you get to be a part of people all across Middle Tennessee sharing some of the most significant moments of their lives. It won't cost you anything. You don't have to wait in line or buy tickets. But at the end of the service today, we will get to celebrate and see some of your fellow high schooler and middle school students being baptized. No one's making them do it. They haven't been bribed with cash or been promised front row seats to a concert. They are choosing to be baptized because there was a moment when their story and the story of Jesus met. And since we'll all be celebrating these people and their stories in just a few minutes, I thought it would make sense if we talked a bit about what baptism is. So what is baptism? Well, there are two sentences in the Bible from the book of 1 Corinthians that I believe might give us a clue. It says, our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into the cloud and into the sea. So what in the world is the writer talking about? Well, for that, we have to look back at probably the biggest moment in the Hebrew people. These people are also called Jews, or the nation of Israel. This is the famous story of when the Hebrew people crossed the Red Sea to escape the Egyptians and slavery and begin their journey of meeting God for the very first time. This would be Israel's defining story, a story that they would share for thousands of years, and actually they still do to this day. So for us to best understand the story of the crossing of the Red Sea, you have to think about the story in three parts. There is before the sea, there's going through the sea, and then there's after the sea. Before the sea, the people of Israel are slaves to the Egyptians. For 400 years, they worked. They were born as slaves, they were worked as slaves, they died as slaves. And there were about 1 million of them. They're seen as animals, not really having any value. Their only value is how much one group of people, the Egyptians, can get out of each Hebrew person while they are alive. How much work, how many bricks, how many seeds planted, how many crops harvested. Ultimately, how much money, power, and position they could gain from a group of exploited and powerless people. Day in, day out, trapped in an endless cycle of back-crushing effort, never arriving, never completing the work, never having done enough. This is their existence. This is their purpose. This is their story. And maybe you can relate in some way. Now, maybe you aren't caught in a cycle of forced labor, but maybe you feel trapped in a cycle of something else. Maybe it's worry, or trying to please friends, or just keeping up with the crowd. Maybe it's feeling trapped by going to that same website for the 100th time. Maybe it's feeling like you never quite measure up to expectations from teachers or parents or a coach. And maybe, just maybe, you feel trapped in a cycle of trying to do the right thing, only to feel like you've let God down yet again. Can I be real with you? We all have a before the sea story. But to experience freedom, real freedom, you can't go around it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. When we go through the sea, these are the stories that teach us like nothing else. And here's the thing, God promises to see you through to the other side. So let's keep looking. After God pulls out all the stops, and through 10 extraordinary events, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gives in and lets the Hebrew people go. They quickly pack up all their belongings and travel east to a place by the sea that God has told them to camp at. Just like God did with the Israelites, God will sometimes lead you to a place where He plans for you to make a crucial decision, a place where you can choose to go back to the way that things have been, or you can move forward and trust with God to new and wonderful and free places. When the king of Egypt gets word that his former property has left, he and his leaders say, "What is this that we have done? We have let Israel go from serving us." So Pharaoh prepares his army with 600 of his best chariots, which are like ancient tanks, along with all the other ones that he has in his arsenal. They all cornered the Israelites between themselves and the sea, and the Hebrew people are stuck, trapped, stranded, no way out. A few years ago, my wife and I, along with our 3-year-old daughter, decided to spend an entire day downtown in San Francisco. This was at a place called Fishermans Wharf. This is a real famous touristy kind of place. It's on the water. There's street performers, every food that you can think of. There's a big sign with a crab on it. You've probably seen it in a movie like Ant-Man or something. We parked in a parking garage a few miles away, and we rode a streetcar down to the pier. When we arrived, to our surprise, there was this really big festival that was happening, which meant there were lots of people and tons to do. We had a blast. Then, when it started to get dark, we decided it was time to head home. Only, so did everyone else. We stood in line to try to catch a streetcar back, and we watched car after streetcar after streetcar, just packed, crammed with people. It wasn't even worth them stopping for us because, man, there was no one from our group that could even fit into one of these. After about 30 minutes of this, along with a very patient and understanding 3-year-old who looked at me at one point and said, "It's okay, Father. I completely comprehend the predicament that we are in, and will patiently wait as you and Mommy find a way back to our automobile." At least that's what she would have said had she not been wailing hysterically into my right ear. I assessed my options. Maybe we could get an Uber. I looked at my phone. It was almost dead. The battery would die before the Uber got to us. We were stuck, trapped, no way out. It was at this moment that a man in a limo pulled up, and he stopped where we were standing and asked if we needed a ride. I asked him how much it would be to get to where we needed to go, and he gave me a price that was actually twice as much of that as an Uber. In my head, I'm going, this is a no-brainer. Of course this is a yes. Look at the situation that we're in. I have a screaming toddler, and at this rate, we're lucky to get home before midnight, if at all. But then I remembered that Heather, my wife, was standing with me, and she is much more money conscious than I am. If I tell the man no, I would be proving to her just how money conscious I am. She'll be thinking that I'm financially responsible and say, wow, I married a money genius. Then she would say, man, I should handle all the investments and finances, and that in the future she would agree to any purchase that I want to make because by default, it would be the responsible thing to do. Won't she be proud of me? So I looked at this chauffeur and I said, no, thank you. We're good. And at that exact moment, I felt a jab in my side from where Heather had elbowed me. She looked at me square in the face and exclaimed, pay the man. I've never been more relieved to be wrong, and we rode back to the car in style. The Hebrew people were trapped, and no limo was on its way to pick them up. In fact, they were terrified, and they cry out to Moses for help. It's interesting to me that they cry out to Moses. Why? Because God is actually there with them. I hadn't had this thought before now, but when you read the story, you see that God's presence is actually there with the Hebrew people. The author says that the presence of God was there in a pillar of cloud, like a tornado leading the way. But the people don't cry out to him, they cry out to Moses. Instead of asking the most powerful being in the room for help, they ask this 5', 80-year-old man with a stick for help. And you and I do this sometimes. In a very similar way. We check Instagram, we do a Google search, we look for something that can help, a distraction, a new pair of sneakers on GOAT that we hope will solve our problem or at least make us feel better for a while. When in fact, we can ask the God of the universe to step in. He's closer than you think. But for the Hebrew people, it's then, in that moment, that God does something that no one saw coming. He tells Moses to tell the people, move on. Where exactly, God? Into the sea. Sometimes before we see God show up in big ways in our lives, we have to take the first step of trust, the first steps of faith, saying to him, God, I can't, but I believe you can, and I'm going to let you lead me. First steps into the sea can be terrifying. But with God, we quickly learn that when he's looking out for us, we really have nothing to fear. God divides the waters of the sea. He dries the land where the water had been running, and he sees his people through to the other side. And when they have crossed, God closes the waters of the sea, wiping out the powerful Egyptians, the very thing that had been enslaving the Hebrew people. When the people are on the other side, it's there that they celebrate. They celebrate their freedom. They celebrate the fact that now they have a future. They can celebrate the fact that their worth is no longer based on what someone else can get out of them, but that they are so valued that they were worth being rescued. God made a way. God still makes a way. You too are worth rescuing. You are worth coming after. He will see you through to the other side of whatever it is you might be feeling trapped by. So how does God rescue now? I mean, if we all meet up in LA tomorrow and plan to go to Hawaii the next day, we wouldn't see a perfectly carved out piece of land going through the ocean. Although that would be really cool. God makes a way when we put our trust in Jesus and make our life about him. God goes through it with you. And just as God rescued the Hebrew people through a person named Moses, God makes a way for you through a person called Jesus. Moses led the Hebrew people to safety. Jesus is willing to lead your life. Moses raised a staff. Jesus was raised up on a cross. Moses spread his arms to separate the waters. Jesus spread his arms on a cross to close the gap between us and our Heavenly Father. The Hebrew people walked from what was certain death to freedom. Jesus actually walked through death so that we could be free. Up to this point, we have been talking about the Hebrew people, but I haven't yet told you what the word Hebrew means. Hebrew means the people from over there, the people that go through it, the people from the other side. To be Hebrew means to have an identity that is before the sea, one that is entrapped, enslaved, stuck. But from that moment, when they step foot on the other side of the sea, they are no longer called Hebrews. From that point forward, God makes a promise with them, and they become his people, the people of God, the people of Israel. Scripture says that when a person says yes to God, trusting Him and living His way, He makes them a new creation. He gives them a new name, a new position. Son of the King, daughter of the King. And unlike the Egyptian Pharaoh, this king, who is God, is kind. The old is gone, and the new has come. And that's what baptism is. It's a sharing of that story, a sharing of that truth. It shares the story of Jesus coming to our side, living for us, dying for us, and through His resurrection, He makes a way to God. And in the same way, baptism also shares your story, that we die to an old way of living our way, living trapped by guilt or comparing ourselves to other people or the wrong things that we do, and instead we choose a life on the other side, made alive by Jesus and choosing to live His way. In just a moment, we're going to see some people be baptized, and they have said yes to Jesus. These will be significant, marking the moment, points in time for that person and for you watching. And this will be anything but mundane. And when they come up out of the water, I want you to celebrate and go crazy, because that's what we do when God brings people to the other side.